Everyone, good evening. Welcome to our Thursday Lives with Trey and Jay. I'm Trey.
And hey, I'm Jay. And
All
we're
right, y'all.
excited. Go ahead. Go
We are
ahead.
so
Go ahead. Go
excited.
ahead.
We cutting each other off, y'all. It's all right. It's excitement. So thank you for joining us. And on this channel, we share our lives to empower women to love Jesus, love themselves, and love others well. And Janelle is going to pull up with the topic of tonight.
Yeah, so the topic for tonight is only knowing Jesus. Only knowing church versus knowing Jesus. There is a difference, y'all. There's some people who just know church, and there's some people who have a relationship with Jesus. And so we're going to talk about that with Lisa Fields. She's the founder and CEO of the Jude 3 Project. It's a dope organization that I would say reimagines apologetics. So we're going to get into it right now, and we're going to bring Lisa on. Hey, Lisa.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, Lisa.
I am good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be with y'all today.
I'm glad that you're here with us. I'm
This is
super
exciting.
I hope everybody's excited too. Okay, so let's get into it. Tell us about yourself off the bat.
So as you said, I'm the founder and president of the Jude 3 Project. It's a Christian apologetics organization helping Black Christians know what they believe and why. And I'm in Jacksonville, Florida. Graduated from University of North Florida with my undergraduate degree, and then got my MDiv from Liberty University. I love to travel, and I love good food.
I love that. Yes, girlfriend.
Those are the two things.
That matters. But I think the first question that we want to just kind of start out the gate with is, yes, as the president and founder of the Jude 3 Project, why? Like, what is the Jude 3 Project? Why'd you start it? Like, what's the importance of it? If you can kind of just deep dive into that real quick for us.
Yeah, great question. So I started it back in 2014, really because I saw a gap in apologetics ministry. I saw that there was just white men for the most part, with the exception of a few, and I wanted to do something to bridge the gap for African Americans, because I felt like the questions we were asking were specific to our context, and if you're not a part of the context, you don't know how to answer those questions. You don't understand the cultural landscape. And so that's why Jude 3 Project was created, to be able to make sure our community knew how to defend the faith and be able to answer the questions that we were being asked versus the majority culture. So that was kind of the birth of it. We started as just having an event July 12th, 2014, with local pastors, and it grew into a podcast. Then it grew to a college tour. Then it grew to a conference, to curriculum. It's just continued to grow over the years, and I'm excited about the development of it.
I'm excited too, and I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of your team, and the fact that it's your job. Like, it's not your job, but it's something that you live to do. Like, that's your thing. You don't have to do anything else. You focus on that, and that is a big deal. That's a
big deal. Yeah.
We know. So I'm super excited about that, and we know that. So this month we're talking all about urban apologetics, and like you said, apologetics is, well, you didn't say this specifically, but apologetics is not like an apology. A lot of people think when they hear the word apologetics, they're thinking, are you apologizing for something? But it's defending the faith. And specifically in what you're doing and what we're talking about this month is defending the faith in the areas or the topics specifically for the Black and Brown community. And like you said, it's very different. As we know, the culture that we're in, or the climate that we're in right now, we have a slew of things that we can talk about, but we're going to get into that. So have you found that there is a difference between having church or church culture and just plain on having a relationship with Jesus? I mean, let's get right into it.
Yeah, there's a big difference. A lot of people, especially Black church, have grown up in church, and it never became their own. And some people just like church. I'm from a Black Pentecostal background, So like I know people who go to church all the time, like go to revivals, go to concerts, the late night musicals as they call them, and
Yes.
don't have a transformational relationship with God. They have encounters, spiritual encounters that give them emotional reactions, but it never translates to transformation about how they live their private life. And so I think that is one of the most challenging things, and one of the most challenging people to reach, because they
Yeah.
mistake emotional encounters with actual transformation or actual salvation. And so yeah, I do think that there is a stark difference between just going to church
Yeah.
and knowing God.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like when it comes to, because you're talking about knowing church and knowing and having a relationship with Jesus, but what does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis? Does that look like the coworker who listens to like gospel music but is hella rude? You know what I mean? Like, what does that actually like look like in real terms, I think? And if you can just kind of share just some practical ways that like that how that actually translates.
Yeah, I think it's like that. The example you gave is really good, but I do think it's a little bit more nuanced than that, because
Mm-hmm.
we're different. We're in different places in our sanctification process. So somebody could be working on their greed. God could be dealing with them on greed, and then still got to work with them on their attitude. So
Mm-hmm.
and they could be genuinely Christians, but I do think one of the ways it fleshes out is that there's not there's not a pursuit of righteousness. There's just a desire to attend a gathering. And
Ooh.
so I think that could be
Mm, mm,
one of the main differences. Like there's not a actual trying to be transformed into the image of Christ, but it's just like, I like to gather, I like to dance, I like to be amongst community. And I think I saw this play out a lot in campus ministry, because
Yeah.
many students, when they, I hate to say it like this, to be frank, but campus ministry kind of takes like the outcasts, the students that can't get into any other social clubs, and sometimes the weirder acting students. I don't, I'm not trying to be, I don't want to offend anyone, but that's, if you
we
go to
get it.
campus ministries, you
We
see,
can't
you
say
see,
it, but
We get what you're
you
saying.
see,
We
you see
following.
it, you see a lot of that, and it's because they wanted community. They didn't have any
right.
other groups that would accept them, but they never bought into God. They just wanted friends. And
Yeah.
so I think that's also an example of how that flushes out too. So they go to community, like the worship, and are in with the people, but after college is over, they're no longer in community, or because it was just about getting friends, it wasn't about getting God.
Mm,
Ooh. So you said specifically, and correct me if I'm wrong because I could get the words mixed up, but you said there's not a pursuit for like righteousness or a transformation, but there is the pursuit of gathering, like just liking the gather. So there's this
Mhm,
thing that people always say. I've heard several times. Not everything sitting in the parking lot is a car, right? So
mhm,
not everything sitting in the church, or never, not every person sitting in a church is a Christian. Which, and what we mean by Christian is a Christ follower, someone who decides to live a life like Jesus,
mhm,
and to pursue his righteousness, to pursue pretty much him, to pursue him. And
mhm,
so there's a big difference. So earlier we talked about, before we got on the live, I was talking about my old pastor and Tracy's pastor. His name is Pastor B, and he's the pastor of Epiphany Church. And he will say this all the time, so this is not like anything new. He said that he was going to church for like most of his life, and around the age of 29, someone shared the gospel with him in the parking lot of the church. And he was a minister at the church, and he had
wow.
never heard the gospel before. How does that happen? And thank God that someone challenged him, because he said it was a challenge, because he said, you know what, I know who God is. I'm a minister. You know, he had the tie and the suit. Can you imagine him with all the suited and booted, because he doesn't dress like that right now. And he had the shoes, the glasses, he had it all. But he didn't have a relationship with Jesus. He thought he had to work for his salvation. How does that happen? I mean, yeah, I don't know if you want to answer that, but like years. He said about 10 plus years he was in church.
Yeah, I think it can happen easily, because you know, many churches, when you come to faith, they don't explain, like, the call to salvation is very shallow. So it's just like, if you want a transformation, come to the altar. So you think, and then they pray a prayer, you don't really understand what's happening. And then you just move on to joining the church, and then you get involved. And if you're charismatic and if you're young, then they push you to the forefront. And so they never seek to say, like, do you actually understand? It's like, okay, you came and prayed, you're saved, but many people don't know what that means. And so why they need to be saved, you know, all of those things have to be explained to a person.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, especially with the obsession with recruiting young people, sometimes when you're young, you get to bypass certain things, because we need young people, and a young person can get other young people. And so I think that's one of the ways I think it happens.
Oh, I want to go there. I want to go there. The part about being the obsession for getting young people, and I think, at least from what I'm gathering from what you're saying, is like, sometimes you can have this obsession with getting young people, and then you're just like, oh, well, that person is charismatic, and that person can
popular,
speak well, and that person is popular, and so on and so forth. And I think the reality is, like, there's so many different things that we can miss in a person or in anyone, when we're focusing on the outward expressions that they are doing oh so well, you know? So I really wanted to just highlight that part, but I wanted to get into legalism. So can you unpack legalism and talk about it, first and foremost, before we get into the heart of the question?
I think legalism is the pursuit of righteousness without Christ.
Yes.
Period.
Yeah.
It is the pursuit of righteousness without the righteous one assisting you in that pursuit. And so I think we get caught up in legalism is usually people trying to obtain their salvation based on works. And so I think that's the plight. And I think people impose their legalism on others, because they're like, if I got to do it the hard way, you got to do it the hard way too. And so I think that's how I would answer that.
So, okay. So I just wanted to make sure to ask that question in particular, because we're talking about, in this particular question, just how does, like, knowing, knowing church, knowing religion, knowing how to do all the things, how to dot the I's and cross the T's, right? How does that lead to church hurt and or legalism? Like, how does one lead into the next? Or does it?
Because I think legalism leads from a place of working from, and when you understand the gospel, you understand that God has already done the work. You're working because you're working from that, not to obtain something, if that makes sense. So God is already in Christ Jesus. He's already made my way, if I can say it in the most practical way. He's already guaranteed my seat at the table in heaven. I'm not working to get the seat at the table. And so I think that leads into church hurt, because legalism inevitably leads to hypocrisy, because you can never keep all of the commandments. And so then you start hiding stuff. And then when you start hiding stuff, that's how people get hurt, because they come and say, I thought you were X, Y, and Z. I see you're doing these other things you told me not to do. And it's like, it's too weightier of a load to carry. It's too heavy to carry all the commands. And so, not that we don't pursue righteousness, but we know that there's going to be that part where we're going to happen to sin, and we have an advocate with the Father. And so I think legalism leads to hypocrisy, which leads to church hurt. And legalism leads to you trying to put what the Pharisees try to do, a fence around the law. You try to add additional stuff that aren't actually God's commands to keep people from not obeying the command. So back in the day, in like a super strict Pentecostal church, they didn't like you going to movies. They didn't like you wearing makeup, because not that it was a command, but they were trying to keep you from falling into another sin. So they put another layer of rules around that, which caused problems, because they're like, when you start studying the Bible, you're like, well, this is not what God is saying. You're adding extra weight. And so I think that's how it leads to church hurt.
Lisa. Exactly. So you reminded me of this situation when I was a teenager, and we have a little bit more time, so I'm gonna just go over it a little bit. So when I was a teen, my friend, now we're still friends, but she had a birthday party at the movies, and I think it was like The Exorcist. It was something like crazy scary like that. And I remember my youth leader saying, you shouldn't go to the movies. You shouldn't have, especially movies like that, you shouldn't have a party. In my Sweet 16, my mom threw a Sweet 16, and my mother wasn't a believer at the time. So it was like, my family's Caribbean. So it's the reggae music, the soca, we weren't drinking because we were 16, but like the adults were. And they made me feel really bad about that. They told me to tell my mom no, and that was friction in my home. Point blank, I just couldn't do it. I said, this is too much. So I went away to college on purpose to say, I don't want to do this church thing anymore. God, I love you, but this whole church thing I can't do. And now that I look back, I'm like, why did they do that? I mean, I know why, but it's like, that was a lot for a 13, 14, up to 16-year-old. And I think if I didn't know the gospel, I wouldn't have dealt with God again. Like but that's why it's so important to know the gospel, like the real true reason why we are Christ followers, and not the stuff around it, which is church. Church is great when it's done right. But when it's done wrong, when it's done like that, it can be really, like you said, lead to hypocrisy, which also could lead to church hurt, and people don't want to do anything about it anymore. So that goes to your show. I love your YouTube show, Church. Why Don't We Go? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, Why Don't I Go was really to kind of help address the question of church hurt and why people were walking away. And I feel like when people walk away, nobody ever really listens to them in a way that's not necessarily where they're not like, they have a wall up. And so I was like, let me just listen to them. I'm not going to give a rebuttal after everything. We did do the Q&A for the part 2, but for an hour, I just let them vent. And I think that's one of the ways that transformation happens. James says, confess your faults one to another that you may be healed. And so that tells me that confession to God brings forgiveness of sin, but confession to man gives me healing from the sins that were done to me and that I've committed. And so once they are able to get it out, then they're open to another perspective. But sometimes we think if they just vent it out, then we can't get them to a place of health. And the key to letting them get to a place of health is to understand where they are and to validate their emotions as well, because some of these things that they've seen are very horrendous and need to be called out. Like some of this stuff
need to be called out.
Yeah. And
insane.
So yeah. And so it's like, I understand why you don't go to that church anymore. That is some craziness. I wouldn't go either.
Right. I would recommend you to go. Right.
So I think that a lot of people resonated with that.
That's awesome. What would you say? I mean, even in having so many conversations with so many different people, What would you say is your most memorable, if you can at least make it one, but either one or three, you know, how people are like my top three, but you know, what would you say are some of your most memorable conversations around either legalism, church hurt, knowing, you know, knowing church, but not knowing Jesus? Like, what would you say have been some memorable conversations around that for you?
Well, I say church hurt, probably would be one of my best friends. He has HIV, but he contracted HIV from a male minister at his church that was married.
Oh
He's
my god!
Oh wow, that was levels. There was levels.
Yeah,
I was
I had
wait,
chills that just
it
ran
took me
through
a
my
second
body.
to like compute all of that.
Right, a male minister
Yeah.
who was married to a woman.
Okay.
Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
Okay.
Man.
But that's probably the most. He had a very, like, he was he had a relationship when he was younger with a elder at church, a male elder that would pick him up. The elder was married, so he's had very much. He was violated young, and then that kept happening in different church circles. And so as an adult, when he contracted HIV, I think that's probably the most devastating
Yeah, that's oh my gosh.
that I've heard. But I mean, his story is not that uncommon.
Yeah.
So I think that because there's so many levels, because it affects how you see God.
Yes.
It affects how you see leadership, how you interact with men, all of those things.
All of it, yeah.
So that's probably one of the most memorable church hurts stories.
Wow.
So
I'm glad he has you. No, seriously, like out of all the friends that he could have, you know, like, and friendship is so important, because if you said that's one of your best friends, that means that he, you know, he's open to talking to you and being vulnerable to you, and then you being vulnerable with him. Where is he now with that, if you don't mind sharing?
I think he's still searching. It's kind of hard, I think, as far as like trusting church. I mean, we talked about it on it's an old episode, but he's been on Jude 3 talking about it. So I've had a conversation with him on the podcast to talk about that, I mean, because a lot of people aren't open about sexual violation from leadership, especially men. So he's still trying to navigate it all.
And what would you say is a memorable story that you would have around, you know, just like an aha moment? I mean, I can only imagine that you've probably seen so many aha moments right in your face, like, oh, wow, you just caught that. Like that just clicked for you. Whether you were saying something or not, whether it was like a moment of other people having a conversation and just, you know, like reading the room. And seeing that. So what would you say is a memorable moment where you're like, wow, that clicked, and I saw that, and I really was like part of that moment for that person?
Yeah, I think I was talking to one of a guy that was helping us recruit people for the show Why Don't I Go? Because I asked 2 people that no longer went to church to find me people who no longer go to church.
They would know, right?
You're right. That makes sense.
So I was meeting with them in the planning, and he was talking about pastors and churches, and he was talking about like still them, you know, having mega churches and all of that stuff. And I talked to him about the stats of churches being like, there's, you know, most churches are small, most pastors are bivocational. And he was like, and I was like, you know, imagine you have a family similar to what I did in the episode. I don't know if y'all watched, but I went through that. Like if you had a family, if you had a full-time job and had to prepare a sermon. And he was like, oh, I never thought about it like that. Now, this is a guy who went from Christianity to the nation. Now, he's just kind of syncretistic in his thinking. But it finally clicked for him at that moment. He was like, I never thought like that pastors had that much responsibility. And I never thought like that many of them were bivocational. and they, they're carrying more than they should many times.
Many times. Yep. That is so true. And that because a lot of times people, like, I've heard people say, oh, my pastor didn't say hi to me, or like my pastor, some of it I get why. Like I called my pastor several times, he never called me back or stuff like that. And it's a lot of times because they got kids. They got, they got a lot of people pulling on them. And a lot of times people are not going to God for the things that they need to go to. So they go to their pastor. There's nothing wrong with going to your pastor, but a lot of that times, like, you really should go to God. So we have a little bit of time left. That reminds me of this. Oh, actually, Trey, you have a question, right? Another question?
No.
Okay, so I'll just bring up like the importance of discipleship. And because we're gonna be talking to Yolanda, I always say Yolanda Solomon next Thursday about discipleship. And I know you know her, and I know you know a lot about discipleship. So if you can just share a little bit about why it's so important, like this whole thing could really be helped by discipleship.
Yeah, it's what God calls us to do. Salvation is his job. Discipleship is ours. It's to help people walk from spiritual infancy to spiritual maturity through life on life interaction. And when we have people who have walked before us, they kind of can show us the way and how to study the scripture. I think that's an important role of discipleship, showing people how to understand the Bible, how to pray, how to also do life with people. So, and I think you can have discipleship in different areas, like you can have mentorship in different areas, because everybody's strong in a variety of areas. Some people may be really strong in prayer, and some people may be really strong in studying the word. So I think discipleship is key for our spiritual development. Without discipleship, we kind of stay in this perpetual state of spiritual infancy, or we're studying, but we don't have anybody to bounce our ideas off of, and we come up with some weird stuff studying because we're doing it in isolation. And salvation was never meant to be done in isolation. It's meant to be done in community. So
and that's the beauty of the church. Well, that's where one of the main reasons why we, it says never forsake the assembly. Like, that's what church is. It's not a building, but it's a body of people. It's a gathering of people, and that's what it's supposed to be. But then as human beings, being flawed as we are, without the Holy Spirit's guidance, without, having that relationship with Jesus, we really stray, and it's a constant thing. It's not like it's one time, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. It's a everyday, God, I need you. I need you to help me to like you said, figure this out and correct my thinking, correct what I'm doing. And so, sanctification is a process.
Running after that one.
Right.
It's consistent running after that one. But I wanted to just ask our last official question of the evening around you being an entrepreneur. I think that is it's so beautiful and so encouraging to always see people who are loving Jesus and still and in like killing the game in whatever it is that they're doing. I think that's always so beautiful to see. So if you can talk to us a little bit about specifically how you transitioned into full-time Jude 3 and what is next for Jude 3, what you guys are currently doing and what's next.
So I transitioned by accident, I will say. I quit my job at Bank of America. Bank of America, Merrill Lynch at the time, but they're owned by the same people. So, but I quit my job and went off to seminary. And before I quit my job, I was like, God, if I'm going to go all out for you and quit my job, I really don't want to get another 9-to-5. That's what I told God when I left. And so God heard my prayers because I never got another 9-to-5, even though I tried very diligently to get one.
Honey, Same thing for me too. I was like, dang, none of y'all want me? Sheesh. I'm a good candidate.
And so that's kind of how I stumbled into it. After I graduated from seminary, I tried to get a job because I knew I prayed that prayer, but I was like, I got bills. So practically I gotta find a job. And so every job, I was supposed to take a job in Tampa. And I kind of felt like in my heart that this isn't a job for me. And then it just all fell apart at the end. It just like, I was getting ready to move to Tampa because I live in Jacksonville. Wow. And then it just like everything fell apart. And so it just was a continual like trying to get a job. And then it was just like, you know what? This is the job. And that's how I became a full-time entrepreneur. Yeah, it was kind of, that was how it practically happened. God provided the resources I needed along the way. But there was definitely frustration because you want security, especially when you've gone to school, because you go to school for security. So you go to college and then when you go get your master's degree, you're thinking, okay, that brings another level of security. And really in this cultural climate, we know that you can have as many degrees behind your name as you want and still not have financial security. And so that's kind of how I transitioned into full-time. We've been very strategic with our organization to help get funding in different ways and not just rely on donations as a nonprofit. And so having products and services has helped us tremendously, especially during COVID and making sure we transition to virtual events has been very strategic in helping us. But God has been gracious. And I look back and I'm like, oh God, you really did this because I'm not that smart. So I'm thankful for his grace in that.
That was so encouraging because, girl, I haven't had a real 9-to-5 since I graduated from seminary too. But I still got the bill from seminary though.
I know that's the problem.
He's working. Somebody's calling me. But yes, thank you so much for sharing that and all the things that you talked about today. This was really, really good, very, very helpful for me, and I'm sure for all those who are listening. Yeah. And so thank you so much, Lisa. Let us know how we can
thank you for having me.
Oh, no doubt. How can we reach you?
Yeah, you could on the website at jude3project.org or on social media at jude3project or you can, my personal handle on Twitter and Instagram is Lisa V Fields.
Yes, there's the podcast, y'all. There's the books. There's the conference. I don't know if you could still access the conference because that was a while ago.
Well, we have we're going to be announcing soon. Registration will be opening soon for DC Courageous Conversations. So
yes, when is that?
It's September 3rd and 4th.
Nice. And it's in person.
Yeah. So we have to cap it at 250 right now, but we'll see how COVID restrictions work. So
I am excited about that. All right. Well, thank you, Lisa. It's been a pleasure. And y'all, we're done, but definitely check us out on next Thursday because we will be here with Yolanda Solomon talking about the site. You know why I call her Yolanda? Because my aunt's name is Yolanda. And every time, and I speak to her like once a week, y'all. Once a week I talk to Yolanda and I still call her Yolanda. Yolanda, she will be talking about discipleship. And check us out here next Thursday on IG on Tuesdays.
All right. And don't forget, y'all, thank you so much for being here. And on this channel, we share our lives to empower women to love Jesus, love themselves, and love others well. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.